Here's a little quick tutorial on how to use these samples with Slate Trigger. First, if you watched my video on recording, you'll know that I usually created a trigger track for my snare drum and my kick in order to trigger easily with Slate Trigger. But you can actually do this off of the original snare. It works really well. I'm just really particular and make sure that every hit's in there perfectly, and it's easier to trigger. So the way you start is you open up your Slate Trigger and you go to the browser and you look for Yosh Drum Warehouse, which you have to put in there. That's a whole nother story, and John Mike's going to tell you how to get it in there. It's not hard at all. And so on this particular song, or this drum track that I've been listening to, the snare's a little weak. So I'll show you what the track sounds like with no samples or anything in it. It sounds pretty good. I added a little bit of top end of the snare, and there may be a point where I duplicate the snare and compress one of the snares and add some verb and stuff, but right now I just want to show you how Slate Trigger works. So I would open up Trigger and go to the browser and open up Yosh Drum Warehouse, open up the snares, and in this case I'm going to use one of the ones that's called Session Snare, and I'm going to use the one with Session Snare with rim, and I'm going to dump it in the first two slots. And the reason is because when I go over to the next page, which is called triggering, I can have a dry snare and I could have just room only snare, and I can also have options of dry, snare with overhead, snare with room, snare with room only, snare room only. In this case, I'm just going to mess around with using this dry snare with the overheads mixed in with it, and then I can control the level of the room sound, and it'll sound like this. And mainly I'm using it to get the ambience without adding reverb, because I like that natural tone of the ambience of this snare. And I could turn up more room like that, depending on how it fits in the track. I'm not sure yet. We're just kind of analyzing overall drums right now. And then if I felt like maybe that's a little too thin and I want to add some more bottom, I might look for another snare. And I know that there's a snare called Nashville snare, which has a little bit of thickness to it. So I'll create another trigger track right here, and I'll go in the snares, find the Nashville snare, and I like the one with the rim, so I'll drag this down, and I'll go back to triggering. We have dry with overhead, dry with room, and it sounds like this. And I'm mixing these together. And I added a little more low end to it. So right now I'm listening blind without listening to the whole track, but I kind of know what the whole track sounds like. So I know that this combination is going to sound fairly nice inside this track. We've got the original snare, we've got a snare that has a nice tight high end snap to it, and then another snare that has some low end, and I'm going to mix them together, and I'll decide the relationships later as I'm listening to the whole track. I'll start blending these back and forth until I get the feel that works the best for this particular tune. So once you get a sound, it's easily saved in Trigger, and I've actually saved some of these settings already, so I can go in here and look, and I actually have what I call Yosh snare, Nash snare, and I can just call it up, and I have it saved, and if it works on another song, it works on another song. If it doesn't, we'll try another one. And I've saved this one over here. This one's called Session Snare. And easily recallable. And there we go. And now, obviously, I can change the room tone, which I think works pretty well right about there. But I can't play you this track because who knows who it is. Might be somebody famous. It might be one of John Mike's productions. I know this is just a short tutorial on drum sampling, but you can get a fuller look at how I mix drums into tracks on gospelproducers.com. I have a class there. And also you can get all these samples and more at gospelproducers.com.